I installed the hidden camera because everyone said my wife was breaking after childbirth, but at 11:47 p.m., the footage showed my mother leaning over our baby's crib, dripping something into Clara's water. "They'll take the child from you," she whispered. The first time I watched the recording, I forgot how to breathe. Not figuratively. Literally. I was sitting at my desk in the small home office off the kitchen at 6:14 a.m., coffee going cold beside my laptop, and I pressed play on the nursery footage and watched my mother walk into the room where my son slept, and I stopped breathing for long enough that my body eventually overrode my brain and forced it back. The timestamp in the corner read 11:47 p.m. My mother was in her robe, the blue one she'd had for years, the one I'd seen her wear at Christmas mornings and Sunday breakfasts, the one that meant this is family, this is home, this is safety. She was moving quietly, with the practiced stillness of someone who knows the layout of a room in the dark. She crossed to the rocking chair, where Clara's water bottle sat on the small table beside it, the one Clara kept there for late-night feeds because nursing made her desperately thirsty, and she produced a glass dropper from the robe's pocket. She added something to the water. Then she turned to the crib where Mateo slept, and she leaned close, and she whispered something. I turned the volume up. I turned it up again. "They're going to take the baby away from you." To my sleeping wife, to a woman who was not awake to hear her, who was sleeping the heavy, medicated sleep she'd been sleeping for 2 weeks, while everyone in my family nodded at each other and used words like fragile and delicate and postpartum with the careful, practiced sadness of people performing concern. I watched the footage 3 times without moving from my chair. Then I walked to the bathroom and threw up. I need you to understand who my wife is before I tell you who tried to take her apart. Clara Reyes Okafor was 31 when Mateo was born. She was a pediatric occupational therapist. The specific irony of this did not escape me. With 8 years of clinical experience and the kind of patient, methodical intelligence that shows up not in how loudly a person speaks, but in how carefully they listen. She was not dramatic. She was not fragile. She had the quiet, grounded steadiness of someone who has spent a decade working with children in crisis and has learned to be the calm thing in a difficult room. I had never, in 4 years of marriage, seen her frightened. Not the way she'd been for the past 2 weeks. Mateo was born healthy on a Thursday morning in October. Clara's labor was long but uncomplicated. We came home 3 days later, and the first week was the ordinary, exhausted, overwhelming love of new parenthood. The 2 a.m. feeds, the learning curve of a tiny human who had opinions about everything, the specific beauty of watching someone you love become a parent. Clara was tired but present. She was good at it. She was so visibly good at it that I told her on day 4 that our son was lucky to have her first, and she had laughed and said he's lucky to have both of us, and then fallen asleep sitting up. My mother arrived on day 8. My name is Daniel Okafor. I'm 34. I work as a forensic compliance attorney, which is a profession that requires sustained, meticulous attention to the gap between what powerful people claim is happening and what the documents show is actually happening. I build cases, I document patterns, I wait, sometimes for months, until the evidence is solid enough to be irrefutable. My family has always described me as the quiet one. My brother Rafael, who is 3 years older and has operated in my mother's orbit his entire adult life like a satellite that never achieved independent trajectory, used to call me Weak Danny when we were kids, then Soft Danny, then in adulthood just Danny with a specific inflection that communicated all of the above. My mother had a version of this too, gentler, more polished, the way she managed everything, but the same essential message. Daniel was thoughtful. Daniel was careful. Daniel was not the son who led. They read my quietness as emptiness. This was their mistake. My mother's name is Beatrice Okafor. She is 61, the kind of woman who walks into rooms as though she was invited first and everyone else arrived late. She is intelligent, well-organized, and in possession of a social fluency that I had watched operate my entire life. The way she managed narratives, the way she repositioned events in the retelling, the way a conversation would end and you'd find yourself holding a different understanding of what had happened than you'd started with, and you wouldn't quite be able to trace the moment of the change. She loved Mateo. I want to say that clearly, because the story is complicated and the truth is complicated, and I think the worst betrayals are always the ones with love underneath them. Real love. Love that has simply been subordinated to something the person wanted more. What my mother wanted more was the house. The house on Clement Street had been in my family for 22 years. My father bought it the year Rafael was born. When my father died, a stroke, 6 years ago, fast and final, he left it to me. Not to my mother, not to Rafael. To me, because he and I had talked about it in the way fathers and sons talk about things they never quite put directly, and he had known what he was doing, and he had done it with specific intent. My mother had never forgiven this. She had managed it for 6 years with the surface of acceptance and the substrate of something else. A sustained low-level campaign to reframe the house's ownership as a technicality, a formality, something that a good son would eventually correct through the right paperwork. She'd mentioned the will twice in conversations I'd found difficult to engage with, because engaging would have required saying directly, "The house is mine," and that's the answer. I had avoided the direct statement because I was trying to keep the peace, and because she was my mother, and because I had been doing both of those things my entire life. When Mateo was born, something in her plan apparently accelerated. I didn't understand the full shape of it until later. What I understood in the first week, imperfectly, was that my mother had moved into the guest room under the guise of helping with the baby, and that Clara had gone from from exhausted but present to something else, something slower, heavier, less herself, sleeping through feeds, losing track of time, staring at walls with the unfocused gaze of someone whose mind is operating through gauze. She's breaking, my mother said on day 10 in the kitchen while Clara slept upstairs. She was folding Mateo's laundry with the precise domestic authority she deployed when she wanted to communicate competence and stability. Look at me. I am the steady one. I am the one who keeps things running. Postpartum psychosis, Daniel. You need to start thinking clearly. You need to think about that baby. She's tired, I said. We're both tired. She told me someone was putting things in her food, my mother said. Her voice was gentle, layered with the specific sadness of someone delivering unwelcome news they've been sitting with for a while. I didn't want to worry you. I went still. She said that? She's not well. My mother set a folded onesie in the basket. There's no shame in it, but you need to get her help. And in the meantime, she paused. The pause was the most important part. Someone needs to make sure Mateo is safe. Upstairs, Clara was sleeping. In the nursery down the hall, Mateo was sleeping. I stood in my kitchen and looked at my mother, and I did what I do professionally when I'm in a room with someone who is managing me. I paid attention, not to the content of what she was saying, to the architecture of it, to what the specific phrasing implied about what she already knew and what she was trying to accomplish and what outcome she was steering toward. Someone needs to make sure Mateo is safe. Someone, not me specifically, not Clara specifically. Someone. I nodded. I said I understood. I went upstairs. Clara was not sleeping when I opened the bedroom door. She was sitting up against the headboard, knees pulled to her chest, eyes on the door with the alert, watchful stillness of someone who has been listening and waiting and trying to determine whether they can trust what's coming through the door. When she saw it was me, something in her shoulders released. Daniel. Her voice was low. She reached for my wrist the moment I sat on the edge of the bed, and her grip was hard, harder than I expected, her nails leaving small crescents in my skin. Something is wrong with me, but it's not what she's saying. Something is being done to me. I know the difference between my own mind and... She stopped, pressed her lips together, steadied herself with the deliberate effort of a person who knows they need to sound credible and is fighting through something to do it. I know what postpartum depression looks like clinically. This isn't that. This is something happening to my body. I looked at her, at the dullness behind her eyes that hadn't been there 2 weeks ago, at the tremor in her hands, at the specific quality of her fear, which was not the unfocused anxiety of a mind in crisis, but the targeted, specific fear of a person who has identified a threat and cannot get anyone to see it. Put a camera in the nursery, she said. Don't tell anyone. From the hallway, my mother's voice. A camera? In your own home? What exactly are you accusing us of? I turned. She was in the doorway. How long she'd been there, I didn't know, but she'd been there long enough. Nothing, I said. Her smile was the smile of someone who has just confirmed what they needed to confirm. Good, because paranoia is exactly what doctors notice. She walked away down the hall. I sat with that sentence for the rest of the night. Paranoia is exactly what doctors notice. Not, there's nothing on the camera, don't be ridiculous. Not, I'm hurt, you'd even suggest it. The response of an innocent person is bewilderment or hurt. The response she gave was a warning, dressed as concern, landed as a threat. She answered like someone who already knew what she was guilty of. The camera went in the next morning. I am a forensic compliance attorney. I have spent 12 years working in a field that requires the careful, legal collection of evidence in environments where the people you're investigating are actively trying to prevent it. I know chain of custody. I know documentation protocols. I know how to place a recording device within the bounds of the law, in my own home, in a room I owned, with no expectation of privacy that applied to the people entering it. The camera went inside the smoke detector above the nursery door. 40mm lens. Motion activated. Cloud synced to an encrypted account on a server that was not my home network, that was not accessible from any device in the house, that my mother could not find if she looked for a week. Then I changed nothing. I went to work. I thanked my mother for her help. I let Raphael, who had arrived on day 11 to assist with what I was increasingly understanding was a coordinated effort, make his jokes about spreadsheets and family, and Danny, who was better with numbers than people. I let my mother perform her care, the careful meals she brought Clara, the gentle management of who held Mateo and for how long, the soft, steady drip of narrative that was repainting Clara as fragile and me as overwhelmed and my mother as the only stable thing in the house. I acted like the confused, exhausted husband she believed I was. I was not confused. I was building a case. The footage from night 2 was preliminary. My mother entering the nursery at 11:23 p.m., adjusting Mateo's blanket, looking at Clara's water bottle, leaving without touching it. The footage from night 3 showed her pause at the water bottle for 3 seconds before leaving. The footage from night 4 was nothing. Night 7 was 11:47 p.m. I have described what I saw. The robe, the dropper, the water, the whisper. I watched it 3 times. Then I copied it to 3 encrypted drives. One in my office at work, one in a safety deposit box at the branch on Merchant Street, one in a fireproof case in my car. I uploaded the original file to the cloud account and set it to read only, with a timestamp logged by the service provider. Then I called 3 people. The first was Dr. Yumi Sato, Clara's obstetrician, 15 years in maternal fetal medicine, the kind of doctor who treats pregnancy as a complete picture rather than a series of appointments. I had her cell because she'd given it to us at the beginning of the 3rd trimester. I called at 7 a.m., and I did not explain everything. Just, Clara was presenting with symptoms inconsistent with her baseline. I had reason to believe there was a chemical component. I needed an emergency toxicology panel run on a blood draw today, and I needed the results treated with absolute confidentiality. Dr. Sato's response was exactly 4 words. I'll be there noon. The second call was to Detective Marcus Price, Financial Crimes Division, 11 years on the force, a man I had worked alongside on a nursing home fraud case 3 years ago, in which my documentation had been the difference between a charge that stuck and one that didn't. We had the specific professional relationship of people who have been in difficult rooms together and trust each other's judgment. I told him I had footage of criminal activity in my home involving my wife and infant son, and that I needed him to be available this evening. He said, "Do you have chain of custody on the footage? Better than most DA's offices." I said, "I'll be there at 7, he said. The third call was to Judge Carmen Moreno's clerk. I had appeared before Judge Moreno twice in civil matters. I did not know her personally. What I had was a documented case for an emergency protective order that met every legal threshold, prepared and organized before I made the call, and the clerk, who was professional and unhurried and clearly experienced with emergency filings, told me the order would be stamped by noon and delivered by 6 p.m. I went back downstairs. My mother was making coffee. "You look terrible," she said. "You're not sleeping. It's the stress of all of this." She handed me a cup. "Let Raphael handle some of the legal paperwork. That's what family is for." "You're right," I said. "I'll think about it." Raphael smirked from the island. I drank the coffee. I waited. The crisis came faster than I expected. My mother had, at some point while I was making calls that morning, escalated her timeline. Whether she sensed something or whether this had always been the plan for day 8, I don't know. What I know is that by 2 p.m., the living room contained Clara's sister, Marisol, 2 neighbors from the street, and Father Dominic from the parish, all of whom had been invited by my mother for what she called a support gathering, and what I recognized immediately as an audience assembly. She needed witnesses. She needed people who would be able to say afterward that they had been present, that they had seen it themselves, that Clara had been clearly unwell, and that the family had been trying to help. She performed for all of them, hand pressed to her chest, voice carefully calibrated to the register of heartbroken concern. The account of Clara screaming that someone was poisoning her, which I had not witnessed and which I suspected was either fabricated or chemically induced, delivered with the specificity of someone who had been rehearsing it. "Daniel," she said, turning to me in front of the room, tell them what you've seen." Every face turned. Raphael folded his arms. "Stop protecting her, bro. You need to be a father right now." My mother's expression was the expression of a woman who believes the moment has arrived, that the audience is assembled, the narrative is in place, and all that remains is for me to step into the role she's written for me, the frightened, finally reasonable husband who acknowledges what everyone can see. I looked around the room, at Father Dominic, who had known my family for 12 years, at the neighbors who knew my mother far better than they knew Clara, at Marisol, who loved her sister and had been told all morning by my mother what to believe about what she was seeing. "Not yet," I said quietly. My mother's smile cracked, just the edge of it, an involuntary thing. "What does that mean?" she asked. I looked at her. "It means you chose the wrong husband to target." That evening, she placed the paperwork beside my dinner plate. Temporary guardianship application, notarized, ready for signature. The language was precise. Clara Okafor, exhibiting symptoms consistent with postpartum psychosis, constituting a risk to the minor child Mateo Okafor. The kind of language that sounds clinical and therefore trustworthy to anyone who doesn't know what they're reading. Raphael slid a pen toward me. "Sign it, Danny. Be a man for once in your life." My mother turned to Clara, who was sitting at the table with Mateo against her chest, still holding him, still present, fighting through whatever was in her system with the stubborn, ferocious love of a woman who understood at some level what was at stake even when the sedative was doing its work. "Give me the baby," my mother said. "No," Clara said. One word, barely audible. The room went very quiet. My mother's face changed, not gradually, suddenly, the performance dropping in a single frame the way a mask drops when the person behind it has run out of patience for wearing it. "You ungrateful parasite," she said. Her voice was low and precise, and stripped of everything that had been coating it for 8 days. "I fed you. I cleaned this house. I managed this family. I have spent 30 years building something, and you walked in here with your degree and your calm voice and you drugged my wife," I said. Raphael laughed. Too fast, too sharp, the laugh of someone reaching for a response before they have one. I turned the laptop around. I had positioned it at the end of the table before dinner, screen facing down. I turned it over and pressed play, and the nursery filled the dining room, the timestamp in the corner, the blue robe, the glass dropper, and my mother's voice coming out of the speakers with the perfect clarity of a $340 recording device that I had positioned specifically for audio quality. "They're going to take the baby away from you." Father Dominic went very still. Marisol made a sound. My mother lunged for the laptop. I caught her wrist. Not hard, not theatrically, just firmly, the way you stop something that needs stopping. "Sit down," I said. She sat. For the first time in my life, without argument, without negotiation, she sat. The doorbell rang. Detective Marcus Price walked in with 2 uniformed officers. Behind him came Dr. Sato, who had the quiet authority of a person carrying information that changes things. Behind her, Judge Moreno's clerk with the stamped emergency orders in a sealed envelope. My mother looked at the doorway with the expression of someone watching the walls of a structure they built themselves themselves turn and face them. Price looked at me. Original device preserved? Camera, memory card, water bottle retrieved before dinner, still sealed in an evidence bag in the kitchen. Dropper, retrieved from my mother's robe pocket this morning while she was in the shower, also bagged. Cloud backup with provider logged timestamp. All untouched, all documented, chain of custody intact. Price gave a thin, professional smile. That's why you don't commit crimes against evidence, lawyers. Dr. Sato moved to Clara's side at the table. She crouched beside her chair, eye level, the way doctors do when they want you to know they are speaking to you specifically. The toxicology panel found elevated levels of a sedative compound inconsistent with your prescriptions, she said. You are not experiencing postpartum psychosis. You were being chemically impaired. Clara closed her eyes, opened them. Her hand found mine under the table and held it with the strength of someone who has been trying to hold on for 8 days and has just been told they were right to try. My mother opened her mouth, closed it. I was protecting that baby, she said finally. Her voice was the voice of someone who still, genuinely, in some part of their mind, believed the story they had been telling themselves. You don't understand what that woman would have done to this family, the house, your father's legacy. I was protecting, you were stealing him, Clara said. Her voice was quiet. It was the quietest voice in the room. It did not need to be anything else. Father Dominic was still sitting at the table, his hands folded in front of him, looking at Beatrice Okafor with the expression of a man revising a decade of pastoral relationship in real time. Marisol was standing behind Clara's chair with her hand on Clara's shoulder, not performing shock, just present, the way you stand beside someone when you understand what they've been carrying. Raphael had not spoken since the laptop turned around. He looked for the first time in the 34 years I had known him, like a man who had no idea what to do next. Detective Price nodded to the officers. They moved to my mother. She looked at me as the handcuffs came out, looked at me with the full force of everything she had, the love and the fury and the unprocessed grief for my father, and the decades of believing she was the center that held everything together, all of it colliding into one expression that had no clean name. You'll regret this, she said, humiliating me, in my son's house. I leaned close enough that only she could hear. No, I said, I'll only regret waiting this long. The handcuffs clicked. Mateo, on Clara's chest, made the small sound he made when he was dreaming, a soft, involuntary exhale, the sound of a person who is entirely safe and has no idea there was ever any question about it. I put my hand on his back, felt his breathing, steady, even, ours.